Hello, book lovers. Welcome back to another book club online with me and Marisa Serafini. And for the month of May, we are covering Making History, which kind of sounds like a nonfiction book, but it is actually a fiction book by Carolyn See. See spelled like I see you, not the sea that I want to swim in. And so we're going to talk about the book. We're gonna obviously spoil it. We're going to give some context about who Carolyn is as an author, give you some history, pun intended there. And then at the end of the show, we're also going to talk about like books that we've been reading on the side apart from this show. The whole goal of what we're trying to do is A, read more, B, share our love of reading with you, the audience, and also give some other recommendations and essentially start a conversation. We love talking with people who enjoy books as much as we do. But let's dive in with this one, Marisa. What did you think overall of Making History?
Yeah, I mean, when you first recommended it, I had never heard of Carolyn See. And then, looking at her repertoire of books, I was like, okay, she does a lot of fictional stories within that are like not that far from reality. And when I say that, it's like realistic storylines when it comes to everyday people and everyday life and living and their jobs and stuff. That's that you can relate to in that way. And so when I read and saw the premise for this one, I was like, okay, a family moving through tragedy and getting over that and like moving forward in life. Oh, interesting. But and we'll definitely get into it, but it's like the different structures of going back and forth between this like Jerry and the two daughters and stuff and following their lives. That was a interesting pattern to follow and see where everyone is in life and how they're dealing with quote unquote grief or tragedy in their own way. So I thought that part I enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, it part of it, I wanted to pick like an author that I hadn't also heard of, so I've not read other works by Carolyn. And, sometimes I do appreciate whether it's any art, right? Books, movies, that are grounded in reality because I think life is fascinating in and of its own. You don't need to invent much. And
Mm-hmm.
so I like that sort of premise. And it's centered around California, specifically like the LA County. So I was like, okay, well that'll be interesting and neat. It's set in the 1970s. So that's kind of what led me to pick it. It is a national bestseller, and she is regarded well as an author. So I was like, all right, let's give this a shot. And overall, like it's interesting to me where I've like it's a book that's very heavily grounded, but also very abstracted, which I understand is very much like in opposition of each other, but that is
Yeah.
kind of oddly the book. And so we'll get into that. But I think it's beneficial. Sometimes like we talk about the author and their background kind of hints at a few things, but not enough to be like, okay, well, it doesn't hint that they would write this book. Whereas if you read her bio, it essentially hints at exactly this book. So she
Mm-hmm.
grew up within LA. She was born in 1934, and her father essentially was a would-be novelist and journalist, but he was also an alcoholic who abandoned them. So her mother eventually remarried. She had a half sister that suffered from addiction and died. She ended up earning her associate degree from LA City College. And she was actually a professor and also a journalist, a film critic, or just an art critic in general. And that's kind of, the highs and lows of her story, right? And knowing that, you essentially understand where she draws inspiration for this book because, it's a family that's, Wynn was divorced, now married to Jerry, and they're kind of blending their two families together. And it's a family drama that is now dealing with stuff. And I mean, the biggest thing, I mean, I want to know from you, did you feel like certain elements happened where um it was just kind of forced for the sake of the story to like have something happen? For example, the big thing for me was there was a car crash, and the first one it was like, okay, fine, cool, we're dealing with that. But then we get a second car crash,
Right.
You know,
Um, yeah, I mean, I can see, first of all, with when you understand Carolyn C's background history and her family aspects, it's like you can understand it sounds like, not to sound terrible, it sounds like a typical American family. You see like tragedy, you see divorce all the time, you see addiction all the time. So these are like realistic qualities that you would find in a typical American family. Again, relatable for and that still happens today, and for the sense of when about the car accidents, like, yeah, we start the book off with the car accident and recovering, and then there's another car accident, and then at the end you're like, is another one going to happen? Because we're already conditioned to think, they're like, oh wait, this is such a recurring theme throughout the book now, like anything that happens you're just automatically thinking car crash. I think it was more so, just not to say it was forced or contrived in that way. I think it was just some things had to happen for us to be like, oh, okay, because a car crash already happened, that doesn't mean it'll happen again, or something else can come out of this. It's a different. I think it forces characters to be like, but maybe it won't be a car crash. Maybe it'll be something more positive, or it forces them to like kind of rethink their lives in a way, and maybe think more positive in that way.
yeah, I mean, more
Maybe.
positive interest. I mean, maybe so. The stories is told in three parts, and essentially, as far as like the big plot items, Jerry tries to make a real estate deal in Southeast Asia, but it goes bad. Wynn hates her life, but likes what she's afforded, so she's the mom. Whitney, the daughter, gets into a car accident and loses her friend Robin. Whitney and Tracy work at an events company and go to Maui, where they hook up with the owners of like this tequila company. And one night, when the two families are meant to go to the circus, meaning Whitney's family and Tracy's family, the best friend, uh, there's a bad car accident. Mostly everyone dies except for Tracy, leaving Wynn, Tina, Kathy, and Jerry to contemplate their lives. And in an odd way, when you say like, it kind of ends with almost Jerry, who's this apathetic character, business tycoon sort of type of guy. He finds oddly some sort of humanity within himself at the end of all this, whereas I think Wynn goes the opposite way, and she has nothing to live for anymore. That's the way I interpreted it.
Right. And I think you can say it's also the age difference too. Jerry is a father. He thinks logistically when it comes to business terms. He sees plans ahead of time. He knows how to communicate to people, how to make things happen. Like he's a very business driven kind of mentality. Whereas I'm sorry, not when the daughter, she's young, she hasn't experienced life as much as Jerry has. And so I think it's like, you can see when we see this theme a lot with mortality motivation, and when the daughter is now trying to move forward in life, because she hasn't seen as much life, she doesn't know where to look forward to. She doesn't know her next steps, where Jerry has had enough time in his life to know how to approach things, whereas the daughter doesn't. And I think that's the difference between these two, and why they go about and do the different things that they go in the future.
Well, it's interesting. Yes, they have a very different outlook on life, but like as far as Jerry, he seems to enjoy none of it, right? It's all like he had a failed first marriage, essentially. Now he's here, um, and he's very much stuck on this business deal. And like, for all intents and purposes, he goes away to a foreign country and does all these sexual acts, except he's married. And then, Whitney, for better or worse, she goes to not a foreign country, but, certainly Hawaii's far away from mainland US,
Mm-hmm.
and, just essentially has fun, gets drunk, and yeah, has sex. You know what I mean? But actually, at least enjoys it, right? So there's a weird dichotomy there, um, of that now that I think about it.
Right. And I think it also shows like the different personalities and how people deal with trauma differently. And so it could be maybe the youthful Whitney enjoyed it more because, you know, that was like a first time for her, losing her virginity, going to a new place. Like everything was new and fresh. Where Jerry, he's had some tumultuous history with a divorce, with now a car accident. So maybe it's just also his age that he's not as excited because it's not so much new for him. Whereas Whitney, it's new, it's fresh, it's exciting.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, as far as the accident, right? I mean, he didn't have to necessarily deal with the accident. He was away on business, so he didn't see the immediate aftermath. And certainly he feels his role, if anything, is to like support and give finances, but it's really Wynn, the mother, who's taking care of Whitney, and their bond kind of, I mean, that's what makes it tragic at the end is, you know, Whitney almost died in the first car accident. So now she, if anything, she has that like, well, live life because I could die at any moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then come to think of it, by the end, yes, she does actually die, you know,
Yeah.
in another car accident. So, um, you know, certainly Whitney and Wynn, her mother, have a different outlook on this than just Jerry. And I don't think Jerry doesn't change that much until he physically attends the funeral and sees, you know, the grieving of a Tracy and so forth. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
And throughout, you know, like I don't want to jump too far ahead, but we do, because we're following Jerry through this apathetic journey of him separating himself from his family, going to a completely different country, basically not really properly dealing with everything. He's doing everything on his own, and we see him, you know, not handling it, like basically avoiding everything. But like I liked that we as the reader finally got that moment where he does break down. He does finally allow his feelings to hit him. And quite honestly, I was worried that we would never get there. But the fact that he got his moment to actually feel what he should have been feeling, despite being way delayed, maybe a little too late. But I mean, everyone grieves at their own time and in their own pace. But he finally got there. So like he had some redeeming qualities, because at first I didn't like him. I was like, you're supposed to be dealing with your shit, dude. But then if he finally got to that moment.
yeah, and certainly, and in a weird way, like by the end, he's being essentially observed by Robin, who's the best friend of Whitney, who died in that initial car crash. Um, and you know, that's kind of coming to peace with it, where like, okay, he's going to be okay, essentially, right? It's not great, but it's okay. Um, Real quick, I know this is tangent, but in some sense, it was a tangent in the book. The whole Donnie and Thea plot line. Personally, I could have done without it. I didn't think it like enhanced. Like, if anything, I was already invested. Like the family dynamics were so nuanced and so forth, and I thought
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot going on there. And if anything, I wanted to explore it more. But then we got these interstitials with Donnie and Thea, these characters who essentially live in Van Nuys. Um, and like, not only do we introduce them, we get like a whole history of both of them. You know, how Thea came to the U.S., how Donnie got to be like a miserable prick.
Right.
Um,
And no, I completely agree, because it felt so disconnected a little bit. Like, and I can see why you say maybe abstract, because like they just kind of seemed random. My whole thing was like, how are you relevant to the story? How are you even really connected to these people that we're reading? Um, and quite honestly, not that memorable. Like they didn't add anything to the plot. They weren't there at the end. So like they just kind of were like placed in. I don't know if it was for padding of the story, but yeah, I agree with you. We could have done without them.
I mean, they were
Maybe it's
essentially,
just like another quality of a separate American kind of storyline, Americanized storyline of people trying to make it in the world there too. But I don't know. They just seem so disconnected from the original people we're reading about.
yeah. I mean, as far as like the plotting of it went, it very much felt like it almost like, okay, they're Chekhov's gun for the second car crash. So it's like it's obligatory to introduce them, but it's like I didn't need it, you know?
Right.
And yeah, in some ways it acts as a counterpoint to the lives of, this very affluent family. But yeah, I don't know. I would have preferred to just continue honing in on, um, I don't even know their last name. I forget, but we'll call it the Jerry family. And
Yep.
certainly, like, I mean, they have a whole rich, side characters already. We have Kathy, who's Tracy's mom. We have Tracy, who is the best friend. Um, and plus we have all the coworkers of like Miss Nenenthal, hardworking Anita, Maria, and Ed. Like, there's so much going on, and even like the Jose Cuervo guys. So it's like, I don't need Donnie and Thea, you
Right.
know?
I mean, like, we can understand how they're related to the last crash, but also we don't need the whole background history. This is where you can just, as a writer, you could be like, this random person who was driving erratically one day was the cause of a multiple car accident. We didn't need the background history of those, of them. It could have been easily solved as like someone was driving like an asshole, um and that was it. So again, with like, maybe it's just her way, the writer's way of just showing like everybody has a background, everybody has a story, even though they're all tied together in this event, doesn't mean we need to know everything about their lives.
Yeah, but I think, like, so the book we read, They Both Die at the End, right? That had sort of interstitials, but it was
Mm-hmm.
serving a larger point, where there was this trust that I felt within reading that book in and of itself, that it would tie somehow together. And not that I didn't, like, I knew that it was there for a reason, but within, They Both Die at the End, it very much was more purposeful, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
added something, like a certain decision became much more clear of how it affected, like a decision by the main characters. We saw how it affected the greater world, and then how it came back to them as well. So it was like this give and take, and it was much more fluid in that way versus here. It was just like, we're leading up to this tipping point, and that's all you get, essentially.
Right. And I think the difference was in with, They Both Die at the end, is that we're already conditioned as readers to be like, oh, time is precious, time is short. We know that they're dying and they're on a time crunch. And so everything that they do is important and is relevant. And whereas these people in this book, and all these random people that we're reading about, they don't know that, like, they're not looking at life like, oh, this might be the last thing I do today. They're just going about their everyday lives. So we don't have that pressure of preciousness, when it comes to, whatever daily things that they're doing with. And I think that's why why it doesn't feel like as important, because the meaning behind it wasn't as dire.
Yeah, and certainly, like, they're in transitional times, but yeah, that, as you talk about it, it does click for me that ticking time bomb wasn't quite there. Like for Jerry, sure, it was make the deal, but there wasn't this side, like, make the deal by like Tuesday or it's never happening. Certainly Whitney is in a phase of life where she's going to enter into college and stuff like that, but it's not, ironically, neither of those things are like explicit. They're just like, they're part of it, but they're not the driving force.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'd be hard pressed to like actually find necessarily a driving force to any of their lives.
Yeah, and like, that's the thing. Um, like, and I had the moment reading this book. I was like, why do I care about these people? Not to sound terrible, but like, they sounded like a typical American family. Successful father, sure, he has a successful job, but like, also typical American teenager. Like, ugh, now I have to read about a girl making stupid decisions and stuff. So like, it my whole thing while reading, I was like, why are these people special? Why should we be following them? Because they don't seem like they're like, so they're not celebrity status. They're just like an average family. So why should we keep following them?
I mean, I think, as you're pointing out, I think the specialty is the fact that they are sort of more everyday families, right? And even though they're certainly more affluent than most, we can find the similarities, right? The divorce, trying to find a purpose in life.
Mm.
And so for me, that was the interesting part. But I don't know, even I look back at like we read Ian McEwan's Saturday, and that is very specific, but that honed in on one particular character. And sure, his family was involved in that, but it still focused mainly on him and through that lens of everything. And not to say that like, we need to follow Jerry or something like that. I'm fine following the family, but I would have really liked that specificity to follow them, because I don't know if you like, there was certain paragraph, like we'd spend like 10 pages on this minute thing, and then there'd be like within like one paragraph, we'd all of a sudden go from like Tokyo all the way to some other country. And I'm like, wait, how did we get here? What happened?
Right.
Did the deal not go through? Like, hold on, what actually happened? Like all of a sudden it just like switches gears and goes like, into hyperdrive. And so,
Yeah. No,
go ahead.
no, I agree. It did feel kind of like all over the place too, but I think it might be because maybe it's just a reflection of these characters that as soon as something doesn't work, they're on to the next thing. And we see Jerry like traveling back and forth, going from place to place without any heads up. And I think that kind of shows the impulsivity of both, Jerry and Whitney, and just their life decisions, that they're not driven by like, they have to do this, that they're like, well, I'm feeling this right now, so let me just do this. And I think it just shows that, again, it could just be the trauma. It could just be where they are in life. They're just going fleeting in between places to place. That transient state that people can get into. I definitely understand that.
Yeah, and certainly, if anything, I thought like, in the sort of, let's say, the middle of the book, things were kind of almost picturesque, right? You had Wynn, the mother, reconnecting with Whitney, her daughter. Baby Jonathan, was born, and like, so not only are Whitney and Tracy like best buds, they're living their adventures, but now Wynn and Kathy, they're forming a friendship and a bond. And if anything, I either thought like, okay, Wynn's gonna maybe leave Jerry because she's in it for convenience, or just accept that, fine. It is convenient. I don't love it, but I've got all this other great stuff there. When in fact, obviously, what happens is like, oh, it's picturesque, but we're going to take away essentially pretty much everything, and leave you with that.
Right. And like, that was just another thing that I had a hard time liking Jerry as a character, because him going, going from country to country and like noticing other women, being with other women, when he has a married wife at home with a kid, with two kids, and I was like, you have an actual good life waiting for you at home. Why are you like somewhere else and not focusing on them? And you should be. Again, so like that was like my frustration with him. And like, when we never saw like a true intimate, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I don't really remember any intimate moments between Wynn and Jerry, other than, just the fact that they're married.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I'd be
like,
hard pressed. I'd be hard pressed.
Was it a loveless marriage? I don't know, because it kind of seemed like that, or at least like Wynn is in it for maybe the like you said, convenience and the stability of family structure, but Jared doesn't seem like he wants anything to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to even find like, he comes home and like just like brushes her hand or something like that. Like, in fact, most of the time, right? Like, I think she was like asleep when he did come home from the office and stuff like that. So yeah, and if anything, I think like it was just a pendulum swing for Wynn with her first marriage. Like, it was so impulsive and just about like, that sort of thing of like, it's all about love when it's not really, but like that sort of lie you tell yourself, we love each other, we'll figure it out. And then,
Right.
cut to 3 years or whatever it is later, all of a sudden you can't stand each other because, of course, life, neither of you are prepared for life and you don't actually hold any of the same values. So at least like she's, I think with Jerry in many ways counteracting that, where it's like, okay, might not, I don't know if even physically like she loves him or whatever. I'm sure like he's a good looking guy or whatever, in that sense. But she's like, you know, I'll overlook every one of those aspects because, it's that sort of thing once you're beaten down by life. These are things that make more sense practically versus like, oh, he's got to be good looking. He's got to like, make me like whatever it is.
Right. Do you think Win settled? It seems like maybe because she had already a failed marriage and now she's taken on a stepdaughter. She has a new child. Maybe she's in it because now she has a commitment and she's kind of at that point in her life where she kind of settled for Jerry
I think so.
just for the sake of stability.
I think so. I mean, she was trying to do because she also had the kids, right? So it's one thing to like, be
Right.
divorced on your own, but like, I think she felt this guilt and was trying to do right by her kids in the way that she could.
Yeah, I like it. And again, I see that because that's a very American thing to honestly, that's a very Midwest thing to do. And I can say that I'm from Illinois. I have witnessed firsthand my sisters also like both of them divorced, like married, divorced with kids. And then I see the men that they choose after their divorce and they're like, are you only in it for convenience and stability or is this really love? That's a very realistic recurring thing when it comes to women when they have that type of history. As unfortunate as it is, like you get to a certain age, and I don't want to like make this about ageism or anything because admittedly I haven't been married, so they're like, oh, Marisa, you don't know what you're talking about. But like I've seen it. Like I've seen women get to the point where they just choose the guys because it's easy for them,
Yeah, I
compared
mean,
to actual love, or they do it because it helps them out where they are in life.
Titanic's one of the greatest stories about that, right? Like Kate Winslet has to marry, because
Yeah.
and they know he's kind of an asshole, but it's like he will keep our family afloat as the mom, very in no uncertain terms tells Kate Winslet.
Yeah, there's money and stability involved, and like you'd be amazed what men and women would do just for the sake of stability, and the crap that they put up with just so they could be safe.
Yeah, and I think there was a few hints at this. Like, I think for Jerry, if anything, not that Wynn was like a trophy wife, but like she was a nice asset to the company dinner parties or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like it
Mm-hmm.
very much felt like that. She's just essentially a prop of like, all right, hey, I need you, come to dinner. Great, do your thing. I don't because Jerry's not really ultimately social, not in that way. He'll talk business with you all day, but that's why I think like him going through, Southeast Asia is very like him just detached.
Yeah.
Um, and I think like Win, if anything, brings that side of it and he needs it for those specific moments.
Yeah, and I think Jerry holds on to him because it's like it gives him that false sense of balance in his life. He's a really great businessman, but is he a good family man? Not really. So, but again, just having the sake of someone, just to say you have someone in your life, like, oh, I have a wife, I have kids, like this is my family, this is my successful family. That doesn't just because it looks like you have people doesn't mean you really do have them. That it's facade, really.
Yeah, it's very much like, yeah, 100%. It's like that checking off a box of like, oh, in the appearance of success, not only do I have the money, but I have a great family. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, at what cost? Like, you don't have a great, like, sure, they're a great family, but you're not great within that family whatsoever. Um, so
Yeah. And that's why Jerry was so hard to like. Because, yeah,
very
sure,
much,
he like his priorities in life weren't really where they should be. Or at
very
least,
much.
like when he should be focusing on his family, he was focusing on work, So it's just like, how he was dealing with things, not great. Ideally, not great.
Not great. One of the things, so it is set in the 70s, but it was written in the 90s. Um, and what I appreciate about that overall is, with the benefit of hindsight, at any moment, like we can look back at like, any period of history as like a changing time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so forth. And it is very fascinating of, I love, to its credit, I love stories that make the connection of like the old is essentially the same as it is today. Like we always think we are advancing and so forth, and sure, technology and stuff like that might change our interactions and our behavior, but like it seems the nature of humanity remains the same, right? And especially like family dynamics, like we're all talking about, whether it's nowadays, like if the dude had an iPhone, he would be on his iPhone. You know what I mean? So it's like it just
Right.
takes on a different medium ultimately. But like you said, teenagers being teenagers, it's like that'll be the same till the end of history. You know what I mean?
Right. No,
So
I completely agree with you. And there's something about the 90s because, again, we're talking about transitional state of the world. Is that, I mean, you had a turning point of a century. That was before iPhones. That was before cell phones were really like an everyday part of life, unless you were like in the business world, like Jerry was. Internet was up and coming, but we didn't use it every day like we did. So, like, and these teenagers, they didn't have cell phones too. But, and like we always joke nowadays that technology and advancement of everything is the reason why everyone's so disconnect. But we had this family in the 70s before all that, um, and like they're already disconnected, and they didn't need technology to be disconnected, and like that's the frustrating thing. They're like they at that point in the 70s they had each other, but they really didn't. So you can't blame technology, you can't blame economics, you can only blame themselves. And
yeah,
that was the frustrating thing about this family.
very much so. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Um, so yeah, I mean, overall, I'm sure there's other stuff we could dive into, but I think that pretty much covers it, unless there's something that you're dying to like just tackle head on.
No, I mean, I think I might have like glossed over, but like the I personally always have issues with teenage girls. Mostly because I hated being a teenage girl. I hated other teenage girls when I was a teenage girl. It's just like, when I see a gaggle of girls, it just like turns something off in me. And I'm like, oh God, I just feel the pain. And then reading about Whitney and her friend just making stupid decisions in Hawaii, it's like, that was like a recipe for disaster. You have these two inexperienced, naive girls in the world being taken advantage by these older guys, even though they like fully knew that they're like, oh, we should be careful, but they're like, nope, we're just gonna have fun. And you're like, oh no, this is like the beginning of a bad Lifetime movie, because you know that it's not gonna be good. And so like following these two girls, I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's like danger, girls, danger. Come on. So and I think that just goes to show with Whitney just where she is mentally, after dealing with a car accident and recovering. And that again, maybe it was that thrill seeking that she wanted to feel good. She wanted to make adult decisions without the supervision of her parents. But as a woman reading another woman making stupid decisions, like I just wanted to like hold her hand and or like pull her back by her shoulders and be like, no girl, that's not a good choice for you right now.
Yeah.
Be smart about this.
Well, so you would think that the counter opposite to Whitney and these bad decisions would be hardworking Anita. And yet, hardworking Anita, in some sense, like she was the epitome of work extremely hard, but play extremely hard. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
my God, the decisions she made, and so wow, for
yeah.
sure.
But like, and in a way you could say balance. She worked hard, but she also played hard.
I wouldn't call
um
that balance. I mean, she hooked up with my boy Ed, and like he was like just, and you know, at the original like cocktail reception, whatever it was. Um, like, yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, she was basically drugged.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, like she just seems like a person Anita is just like 1,000% balls to the wall, and no matter what she does, like there is no off switch with her. Everything is just like 1,000 thing, like to the max,
yeah,
like super extreme kind of.
yeah,
And I think that shows like it was nice to see Anita like at that high extreme level compared to Whitney and Wynn that were kind of like up and down. You had someone who's constantly up here, and then the others are like goes up and down, back and forth.
yeah.
So I like that we got like a different set of women going against, not to say going against each other, but we can see the different qualities of the type of women in this book.
Yeah. One thing that I realized, so I want to talk about the book essentially begins with Robin and ends with Robin. How did you like that sort of
Mm-hmm.
bookend of him as a character? So he obviously he's the character who passed away in the initial um, car
Mm.
accident, and so by the end he's rejoined with his friend Whitney, and
Yeah, I
they're sort
mean,
of looking, yeah,
quite honestly, you could call it poetic, as terrible as it is, because we start the book off like Robin, who's like so excited to go see a circus. He was excited to go somewhere for something fun, and then unfortunately we know what happens. And then at the end, now we're following all these people, and coincidentally we have yet another car accident and now he's reunited. So you can see it in like a poetic, angelic way. It's like now he's reunited with his friend again. Like, oh, now they're looking out for each other. Now they're with each other again, albeit dead. um, but they're together. So
yeah. All right, well, that does it for making history. We invite you to comment about anything that we did not touch upon. Let us know, and certainly would love to explore that with you. Also, you can hit us up on social media at Serafini TV for Marisa. I'm at Phil
sorry.
Svitek. But that is not the end of our show. Let's first preview what we will be talking about soon. So next month, you, me, and US.
US.
Um,
Yes, this is my choice for our June pick. June being Pride Month. Also going back to our discussion of they both die in the end. We toyed with the idea that we need to have more LGBTQIA queer community stories out there. This is definitely part of that, and it's also written by a Filipino American woman. So I think we're killing two birds with one stone with this book, and it's a great story. It's about two friends slowly falling in love with each other when it becomes kind of too late in life, and like what do you do about it, how do you go about it, how do you deal with your feelings, and the whole realization of just who you are as a person. You're realizing your sexuality, your personality, what does this mean for life, what does this mean to relationships, all those things, all the feels up and down in this book. I loved it. I'm going to read it again. It's so good. I'm excited to talk about it, but it's important because it's a very relatable story. No matter who you are, there's something for everyone. So I'm excited to cover that for our June Pride Month. And ethnic, it's currently May too, so it's also Asian Pacific Heritage Month too. So I was like, we got a lot of good things all together.
yeah, and certainly we love exploring new authors. That's why, for me, I picked Carolyn See, and so you read it. I'm excited to read it. After that, I found this book randomly in a local bookstore. It's called Imagining Argentina. So for July, it's by Lawrence Thornton, and
Mm-hmm.
ironically, or whatever word you want to throw in there, it is also set in the 1970s. This one's set in Argentina. So, I figured we'd kind of do some globe trotting and, see what life is like in
Nice.
other countries. So,
Yeah, and you, me, and US is in the Philippines. So there you go. Yeah, and then our August choice is Prodigal Summer by Barbara Kingsolver. She's written a lot of novels. I've definitely heard of her, but I've never read of her. Read her stuff, so I'm excited to read about that. I'd love to give you the premise, but honestly, I don't know. Other than we're following a woman and going through multiple changes in life. So, the transient states that we love to watch and read about.
Absolutely. Well, do you want to kick things off with what you've been reading on the side?
Yeah, I just finished Daisy Jones and the Six. That was a great story by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I feel like she's very much in the zeitgeist right now. I currently have another book of hers, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Currently reading that. Exciting things. I'm a sucker for book talk, not gonna lie. And I actually just reread, don't ask me why, but I just reread The Great Gatsby.
Okay. That was not on my bingo
Classic.
card.
Yeah, I know. Classic American story. And it was an easy read, not gonna lie. And I was like, all right, I can see why Americans love this. I mean, I read it years ago, but and I was a young teenager since, but now reading it as an adult, I kind of have a new appreciation for it. And I can understand why Americans back then really gravitated to that story. So, some things here and there.
Awesome. Well, currently I've never read The Hobbit, so I'm reading The Hobbit.
Nice.
Obviously a classic. I've read Lord of the Rings, but never The Hobbit, so I'm giving The Hobbit a go. I really enjoy it. It's fun. I reread one of my favorite books, The Tao of Pooh. You can literally read it within an hour. It's about Taoism and Winnie the Pooh. What better combination than that?
Nice.
Marissa and I saw Suzume in theaters, and I've been studying anime. So one of my favorite movies is Your Name, and I did not realize that there's a novelization of it. So I was like, well, let me read the book. So very
awesome.
easy. Again, another book you could probably read in an hour if you wanted to.
Nice.
I have not
Suzume
read this
was a
one.
great book too. Yeah.
Great movie.
Suzume was a great film. Yeah.
Yeah.
We both enjoyed that. So yeah, and Your Name, I definitely want to watch the movie, read the book too.
Listen, come over, watch it tonight.
Heck
Anyway.
yes.
And then one that I didn't read, but I do want to recommend. So this is someone I work with, Elise Lunan. It's called On Our Best Behavior: The Seven Deadly Sins and the Price Women Pay to Be Good. I've from the periphery known about this book for essentially 3 years. And I know, the various concepts in the book and stuff like that. So I think it's a very smart book, very needed book, and not just for women, but I think men as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been up to as far as reading.
Yeah, great things.
Great things indeed. All right, well, that does it for us once again at Serafini TV.
That's right.
And I'm at Phil Svitek, and we'll see you next month for You, Me, and US. Bye.